வணக்கம் நேயர்களே, இது வெளிச்சம்.
He is Lasantha Wickramasinghe. He is just another person. There are so many murders in everywhere. In the whole world there are murders. Why are you asking about Lasantha? Who is Lasantha?
You know, when you say who is Lasantha, he was a husband. That's who he was. And yes, he was a very bold and brave journalist.
Président de la République socialiste démocratique de Sri Lanka.
I was elected by my people on a promise to rid my country of the menace of terrorism. I say that Sri Lanka is now at peace. My responsibility is to the lives of millions of men, women, and children, and those to be born.
இன்றைய வெளிச்சத்தில் நோர்வே நாட்டைச் சேர்ந்த ஆவண திரைப்பட இயக்குனர் திருமதி பியாட்டே ஆம்ஸ்டாட் அவர்களோடு உரையாடவிருக்கின்றோம். 2007 ஆண்டு வெளிவந்த தமிழர்களுக்கு பரிச்சயமான மை டாட்டர் த டெரரிஸ்ட் என்ற கரும்புலிகள் பற்றிய ஆவண திரைப்படத்தை பலரும் பார்த்திருப்பீர்கள். அப்படத்தை இயக்கியவரும் இவரே. முள்ளிவாய்க்கால் பேரழிவின் போது சிங்கள இராணுவத்தின் போர்க்குற்றங்களையும் மனித உரிமை மீறல்களையும் உலகெங்கும் வெளிச்சம் போட்டு காட்டிய பல ஊடகவியலாளர்களின் துணிகரமான அறம் சார்ந்த செயற்பாடுகளை முன்வைத்து இப்போது இவர் இயக்கி வெளிவந்திருக்கும் படம் சைலன்ஸ்ட் வாய்ஸஸ்.
Sri Lanka er vakkert som paradiset. I flere år var denne tropiske øya også mitt hjem.
சென்ற வாரம் ஸ்காப்ரோ திரையரங்கில் நடைபெற்ற சிறப்பு திரைக்காட்சிக்காக கனடா வந்திருக்கும் திருமதி ஆம்ஸ்டாட் அவர்களை இப்பொழுது சந்திக்கின்றோம். வெல்கம் டு வெளிச்சம், Beate Amestad.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, many of our viewers, will remember you as the first ever journalist who was allowed into the caves of black tigers, or so to say, the black tigers of the north, right? Also, the time along, you have roamed the caves of in the south, in the we call vampires of the south from our side, but I don't know whether it's the right term, but successfully freed the truth from the clutches of the Princess of Darkness, right? The name of Silent Voices is the documentary that you produced. The film was screened in Scarborough Coliseum Theatres last week. How did it go? Was it successful?
The theater was almost fully packed, so it was. I'm always a little bit nervous to screen the films for mainly the diaspora, because you're all insiders and you know the story very well, and my intention is mostly to
non-Tamil,
to make these issues available or for a non-Tamil audience. But I think it went well. Yes, there was a lot of interest. So but it's also painful for a local audience to watch the film, because it brings up memories and stories that you have to deal with. So I'm aware of that.
So the audience was mixed, or mainly?
It was mainly a Tamil audience. Absolutely, it was. Yes. Yep.
So, but I believe this was screened at the Human Rights Watch Film Festival before, right?
Yes, the film actually had sort of a pre-premiere in Oslo in February this year at the festival called Human Wrong Film Festival, and then it had its official international premiere in The Hague at a festival called Movies That Matters, and it had a U.S. premiere in June this summer at the Human Rights Watch Film Festival in So there were 3 screenings at Lincoln Center.
So have you been getting interest from distributors all over the world?
No, it's not that easy to sort of raise awareness or to create awareness. Sri Lankan Matters has sort of always been a little bit on the side of the mainstream media. So that is unfortunately my experience, that it's the Arab Spring, that's lots of
That
awareness
takes
in
us
the
into stage, yeah.
It does, and
Yeah.
Sri Lanka always gets sort of sidelined a little bit.
That's by intention? What do you think?
I never really figured out why, but it's a far
not in the
away
radar,
place.
yeah.
It's a far away place, and I think there are lots of reasons, and also because there, it's has been so concealed, and it's difficult for journalists to work there, and also international media are not allowed to get in there, so it makes it difficult to get the truth out.
This film is about silenced voices of the journalists in Sri Lanka, without whose courageous and selfless acts the world couldn't have witnessed the calamity and revolt in Sri Lanka. Once again, you, the fearless Beate Amestad, have risked your life to visit the internment camps to bring the truth out. How did this all begin from to start with? What had inspired you to take such an incredible task?
Well, I don't, my lives are probably not in danger, so but
it's the people who have been helping you.
It's the people who help me, and also the journalists that are portrayed in the film. Their lives have been put in danger. So I, and sort of the film is about their lives, and also what immense, but the courage they have to work as journalists, and how dangerous it has become to be a journalist from Sri Lanka. Initially, I lived in Sri Lanka for 3 years. That's how my interest came about.
That was prior to 2007 when
that was during the ceasefire from 2003 to 2006.
Okay.
So. And as I worked for television, Norwegian television, for more than 20 years, I was interested in making documentaries and leave sort of the more commercial television and work in depth. And I started doing research when I came there on the in the war areas, and that's how I managed to get into Vanni also because of the ceasefire. So I met with the people, and I was sort of deeply touched also with the civilian population living in the border areas, and saw how their lives were so affected by a 2 decades long war in those days. So that is how my interest began, and which ended in the film My Daughter the Terrorist, and which was released in 2007. And then it took a while, but it was picked up by film festivals and broadcast corporations worldwide, and it was screened. And then my network to the Tamil community was quite good, and my interest also for what was happening in the war zone was very much there. And I had friends that lived in Vanni. I knew the people there, and of course I saw exactly what was happening around, towards the end of 2008, where the last sort of UN convoy was sent out, and all the international media workers and the NGO workers they were ordered out, and there were no journalists left to tell the story. So I knew something horrible was about to begin, and I tried to follow what was happening, as much as I possibly could. And I received videos also coming in of horrible events, and I also noticed there was hardly anything shown on media in the West. Mainstream media, hardly anything was mentioned. They talked about, I recall in December and January of 2009, they talked about the invention of Gaza, and Norwegian people demonstrated for the Palestinian people. Not even one Norwegian marched for the Tamil cause, and nobody seemed to know. And it was reported that this Sri Lankan government, it was a war on terror, and they were trying to deliberate the civilians from terrorists. That was what mainly the world was told. Exactly. So, I sort of slowly began, how can I make another film? How can I possibly make another film? And I wasn't even sure I was able to get back to Sri Lanka because the government was not really happy with my first film. So I thought maybe I'll try, and that was in August 2009. I managed to get in there and just for a research tour, but then also people told me, and also diplomats whispered to me, and they told me that what is happening here. And
so have you been trailed by the Sri Lankan Secret Service?
I never know whether they tailed me, but I know they were extremely unhappy with the first film. But I understood it was much too dangerous to do any follow-up from Sri Lanka itself, and also journalists disappeared and they were tortured and they were killed, so I couldn't talk to any journalist inside Sri Lanka. And I couldn't film. I had to I had to be responsible for a crew. It was too dangerous to bring a foreign crew in there, and I couldn't work basically. So that is how the idea came up, that maybe I should make a film about the journalist that has escaped and live abroad. Yes, to try to tell the story that way.
So where did you meet up with these journalists in hiding now? They are all outside of Sri Lanka, or?
Yes, some of them are some of them are in the West, safe in the West. Some are even in secret exiles in the West. Some are in transit countries. Some are hiding in India. Some are desperately fleeing from one country to another country, unable to find find a permanent settlement. They don't have a visa to stay in the West.
So they made themselves refugees in seeking the truth, right?
They have become refugees because their quest for finding out, or writing, or being journalists. Yes, Sri Lanka became one of Asia's most dangerous countries to be a journalist.
I have my own experience where I have seen how brutal the state can be to its own so-called nation, the Sinhalese. So it's simple logic. If they can be so brutal to their own people, they can of course be more than that brutal to the minorities.
Sonali Samarsinghe, the main character in your film, she is the wife of late Lasantha Wickramarunge. Then she must have been some instrumental in your making of the film. So how did your contact with her to start about?
When Lasantha Wickramarunge was killed on broad daylight in January 2009, that was sort of, he was the most famous journalist and editor of the South. When he was brutally killed, it sort of, everybody understood that it was very, very dangerous to be an investigative journalist. Right after she had to flee herself. So I really wanted to have her to participate in the film, and I succeeded in finding her and contacting her, and I met with her. She was that time living in Boston, and it took a while. She was in shock. She was in total shock. She had to leave everything behind. She had to. She lost her husband. They had actually just married.
Yeah, that's recent.
And she had to leave everything, and it took a while, but finally, she agreed to be part of the film.
I see.
Yes.
So Lasantha, he was targeted because of his writings. Just before his demise, he was writing about the disappearances of Tamils, also most around the war zone, right? He was
you know, I don't know what his plans were, because he was killed, you know, right before, the final stages of the war began. So probably the government was very afraid that he would expose the government, because he had access to a lot of information, a lot of detailed information. So they probably needed him out of the way before they started the last offense. And he was ruthless in his way. The way he criticized the government, he was fearless. So they probably needed him out of the way, and also sent a very clear message to other journalists that you better keep your mouth shut.
So there was one Tamil journalist in the film that you met him in India.
Yes, there were a number of journalists that were on the run, and that were, and some of them, I couldn't meet because they were not in safe locations. But then I know the only sort of correspondent that was in the war zone and reporting from the war zone itself was a young journalist that worked for Tamilnet, and it was actually through his photos and through his videos that I was sort of exposed to the horror that took place. So when I heard that he was in hiding and that he had managed to come out of Sri Lanka but was in hiding in India, I was able to get in touch with him, and he agreed to meet with me secretly. At the same time, I was also interested in visiting the refugee camps in India, because I understood there are still more than 100,000 Sri Lanka Tamils that still live in refugee camps in India, and they have been living there for the past 20 years. So I wanted to go in there as well, which was also illegal. So everything, you film in India, everything is sort of illegal, and I had to be very careful. And I tried to go there as a tourist, but you have to apply for a visa, and they tracked me down, and they knew, well, they were suspicious of what I was doing, so they traced me.
Hello, Beate.
Hi, Bashana.
Hello.
Hi. I received this phone from our contact person that wanted to take us into the camps.
Yeah.
And he said that the Indian intelligence is after me, and they know everything about me. They know what I'm up to, what I'm doing here. How is it possible that Indian intelligence knows what I'm doing? Huh? This is safe.
Yes.
Huh?
Okay.
So you can send everything there. I'm sorry for bringing you into this trouble, but you should leave now, huh?
Yeah.
You should leave.
Yeah.
Yeah. Take care. Yeah.
Beate,
Yes.
you have been followed from the very moment that you landed,
Oh.
Leave the country as soon as possible.
So when you went to internal camps in Vanni, so how did you go about getting there? Getting access to that camps, internment camps in.
I don't really want to go into that.
No. Okay. Yeah.
No.
Okay. So, we have to not only save yourself but save others as well,
Yes.
right? I understand that. Okay. So, about the other film that My Daughter the Terrorist. Although at that time the area was under LTT control, I don't know whether most of the film was shot in the.
Everything was shot in Vanni,
Vanni, but
yes.
not necessarily within the Tiger's control.
Everything was shot within the Tiger's control, and I was actually free to roam around, without any control. I would find the scenes and spots, and in the beginning there was a senior cadre that that followed us, but mostly she fell asleep. So,
Okay.
so I was a bit surprised how freely I could roam around and film there. Yes.
How did you get to pick those two characters, main characters, Darshika
well,
and Kultura?
It took almost 1.5 years before the political wing of LTTs agreed that I could make a film there, because I said, I want to make a film without any interference from you guys, and I want, complete. I don't want any control from you. So, and I want to handpick the ones I will have, that will be part of the film. So eventually, they said okay, and they organized an audition, and I interviewed approximately 30 girls.
Okay.
They all had very interesting stories, but I was looking for black tigers with a Catholic background.
Oh, okay. You
Yes.
handpicked them. Oh.
I handpicked them, and I was absolutely, because I thought it would be interesting for an international audience, for a Western audience, to actually see that so many of the Tamil
churches and whatever.
yes,
Yeah, okay.
and many of also the black tigers were actually Catholics.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
So that's one of them is Catholic, one of them is Hindu.
Both
Catholic?
of them are Catholics. Both of them are Catholics, and one of them actually wanted to become a nun, and she had been a devoted Christian, and the other one was also a devoted Christian, and she wanted to be. She was a paramedic, and she wanted to become a nurse. So these were people that were, initially wanting, to serve and help their people, and you can speculate why they wanted to become black tigers, and I was sort of interested in why would young women, want to kill themselves in such a very dramatic way, and it's. But they had survived, they had been regular fighters for 7 years, and they had been fighting with cyanide capsules in their mouth many times. For numerous times they had thought they were going to die. At some point, I think, if they can control your own death, I think it's easier for them to just live day by day, because they think every day is going to be my last day, and that had been their way of living for 7 years. And when I met them, there was a ceasefire, so they were sort of in a, they couldn't execute any missions. They were put on a pause. They were just waiting. And I knew from the last batch that had been sort of trained to be black tigers, none of those girls were alive. So they were only alive because it was a ceasefire.
So what was your impression when you first met these girls? Did you pity them? Did you admire them for their courage and for their dedication to the cause? So would you hate them?
No, I was basically just curious. They were beautiful girls, talented girls, and I was just really, really curious. And I was just curious about a lot of things. How do you, how do you dare to put a, belt with bombs and do such a things? And how did they train? How did they think? In the beginning, their replies were sort of very much sort of in sort of a propaganda replies, and I said, hi, hey, hello, I just want, you have to explain to me and tell me things, and I want to know, you have to be personal and not talk like propaganda machines. And at one point I said, don't you have any feelings? Don't you have any, you're talking just, you just talk from your heads here. And then they looked at me and they said, aren't you happy with our replies? And I said, no, not really. And I asked them whether they don't you have any hearts? And they said, yes, we do, but we can't feel anything because it's so painful. So I told them, if you're going to connect with any audience or any international audience, you have to show me your heart, otherwise you're not human beings. So I asked them, how can you sort of connect with your hearts? And do you think, you know, when I asked them where does the pain come from, and then they told me, they started to tell me their stories, and I said, could we go to these places where this pain came from?
I see. Yeah.
And then they sort of okay, let's do this, and we're going to show you where the pain comes from. And
so you actually visited the scenes
yes,
where they have been
yes,
traumatized.
Yes,
okay.
Yes. I sort of took them back to where their pain came from.
அதில் பாடி என்று சொல்லிச்சுன்னா அதில் சம்பளத்தை வேலை செய்கிறாங்கல்ல அந்த பாவியல் இருந்து எங்களோட அம்மா அப்பா நான் தங்கச்சின்னா நான் இவ்வளோ பேரும் ஒரு இடத்துல இருந்து நாங்கள் நடு வெயிலுக்குள்ள அப்போ அந்த கொமாண்டருக்கு வந்து நல்ல ஒரு வெயில் பிடிக்காமல் ஒரு இதை ஒன்றும் போட்டு எங்கள் சிப்பாய் எல்லாம் நிற்கணும். அப்போ எங்களோட அம்மா பார்த்து போட்டு என்ன செய்யாண்டால் துவாய் எடுத்து எல்லாத்திலையும் பிரித்து போட்டு எங்கள் 2 பேரையும் இருத்தினுவான். 2 பேரும் உடனே அவங்க வந்து அதை பேசி போட்டு உடனே அந்த துவாயை பறிச்செறிஞ்சு போட்டு எங்களை அந்த மணலுக்கு விட்டு நாங்கள் அந்த மணலுக்குள்ள ஒரு 3-4 மணித்தேரம் அதுக்குள்ளே நாங்கள் சரியாக துடிச்சு அந்த அந்த வெயில் உள்ள மணலுக்குள்ள நாங்கள் கால் வச்சிருக்கிறோம். இவ்வளோ ஒரு இது அதை வந்து நான் நேரடியாக என் அனுபவத்தில் எனக்கு நடந்தது, எனக்கும் எங்களோட தங்கச்சிக்கும் என்னோட அம்மா அப்பாவுக்கு முன்னால் நடந்த சம்பவம்.
The third person is of course Darshika's mother, because I wanted to know. She didn't know that her daughter was a black tiger, and she talked about, you know, how is it to be a mother and losing your daughters, both to the LTT and also both to the soldiers, and you know, to be a mother in that in between. And how do you protect your daughters? How do you protect your children? And the war, you know, goes on and goes on and goes on, and you don't know whether you can leave for work and whether they will be survived, but whether they will be alive when they come back. And they feared torture, they feared the soldiers, and she also feared the guerrilla. So I could very much relate to her.
Yeah. One other thing that I noticed on the film, on My Daughter's the Terrorist, you've been focusing mainly on women. Is that by intention that you left out the men? Or
for me, it's easier to communicate with women. You know, I'm myself a mother. I am, you know, it was easier, and very often the stories of men are told. So I wanted to know the stories of women, and also because female fighters were fascinating, and I first noticed when I met the female cadres, you know, they would shake my hand like I would just, you know, they would very hard, and they would look me straight in the eyes, and they had such confidence that it was quite amazing.
See the transformation, because you might have done some research on Tamil women's traditional role in pre-1983 Tamil women's role in the kitchen, basically, right? So the transformation from that to this, to become an assertive woman, you've seen that, you witnessed that when you interview these girls?
Yeah, I would say they had some extraordinary confidence. You know, their hair was short. You know, many women, they had the short hair, and they would ride the big motorbikes, and they could carry, you know, heavy weapons.
Which used to be a taboo back home. Okay.
And they were eager to show me, you know, how capable they were.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. But the mother, I think she, like you said, you know, she has been floating between a mother who supports the cause and she's proud of her daughter as well, and at times that being a real mother and then losing her daughter to, you know, to obviously she knew that she's going to be a black tigress one day, and then she's going to be blowing herself up, but living with that feeling, right? You know, she's been tears coming out most of the time in the movie, right? As a mother, you felt.
It's a horrible experience when you can't provide for your children, when you can't give them security, when you can't give them any future. I think that is sort of the worst feeling for any mother, and I could very well relate to her on those topics, and she was desperate. You know, she was desperate, and and she was poor. You know, she only had the one sari, so she was wearing her, and her handbag was absolutely empty. She didn't have anything. And she said that Darshika was very much a religious person. She had very much was interested to sit by the priest. She wanted herself to become a nun one day, but when the churches were bombed and the churches couldn't give them shelter, she probably fled and escaped to the tigers. So for any mother, you know, you are, you know, you don't want to see your children die.
I see.
No.
Yeah, it's quite natural, and also the ruined, the bombarded buildings and the churches. Definitely, the angles that you chose was very. I mean, it's incredible to not to forget, you know. So those kind of images, you expected that to make some impact in Western audiences, right?
Yes, and and I do think it sort of changed sort of the perspective of the Western audience, because, you know, this was sort of a few years after 9/11, and the people in the West, they had, you know, they didn't know who are the suicide bombers, you know, what kind of people are they, and this is, you know, and what is it, what is terrorism and what is freedom fighters? So I don't provide with any answers. I just want the people to have more background and also think for themselves. You know, in the West, we also came from a sort of a revolution. We have also struggled to have our independence. It goes back even 100 or 200 years, but everybody has fought for their independence as a nation, and very often, you know, people in the West, we tend to forget that. So what, you know, the American Revolution, you know, that was free, the USA, and, you know, everybody has their revolution. And it, of course, we have to discuss the means and what is allowed and what is legal warfare and things like that. But I could relate to that people, you know, use their own body as a mean to sort of to protect themselves in a way, if that is what they think they're doing. Very often, I thought there were scenes in that I shot with the girls that was not incorporated in the film, but I wanted to know how much they actually knew of the conflict, and they didn't really know much. They didn't have much factual information about the conflict. The information was basically emotional, you know. They had the emotional background of growing up in the war zone, and that was their pain, and that was probably why they had chosen to become fighters.
But could that be intentional as well? You know, not to just, you know, just to if they were informed of the real way of the Western world is thinking of them, right? So, do you think they might have changed their?
You know, they are the result of the reality they grew up in. You know, they didn't have much education. You know, their education had been, you know, abrupted, you know, regularly. They were on the run. They've been displaced. They've been in refugee camps, so they didn't have much information, you know, they didn't have much education. But I think, you know, they're very much sort of the product of living in a war and growing up in a war and not seeing any future. And they very much told me that if we don't fight, we will be slaves. And for me, it was kind of difficult to relate to that, because I thought that maybe it was a bit exaggerated. At the same time, you know, you know, what happened in 2009 was also so shocking to see.